This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. I'm Eben Jansen. The show is live and is broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now with our whole show available on our YouTube channel all of the time. Today we're back in the North Gauteng High Court as the Oscar Pistorius trial resumes. We look back at last week's debacle with the EFF in Parliament and get an update from the Farlam Commission a little bit later. But first, Katrine Milan gives us a news update.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Katrine Malan and let's take a look at the news making headlines this morning. Oscar Pistorius is back in the North Gauteng High Court in Pretoria today. The trial resumes after a 6-week break, during which Pistorius underwent a psychiatric evaluation. After psychiatrists testified, he suffered from general anxiety disorder. The results will determine whether the disorder influenced his actions when he shot his girlfriend Riva Steenkamp on Valentine's Day last year. Over 220,000 members of the National Union of Metal Workers are expected to down tools from tomorrow in the metal and engineering sector, following 3 months of failed wage talks. The union wants a 12% increase. The strike could have devastating consequences for the country. International news. A state of emergency is enforced in northern Nigeria following near-daily raids by suspected Boko Haram militants. In the latest attack over the weekend, 4 villages and a number of churches were attacked. Some unconfirmed reports say more than 50 people were killed. It is the latest assault on villages near Chibok, the town where more than 200 schoolgirls were abducted in April. Then in sport, Costa Rica reached the last 8 of the World Cup for the first time when they beat Greece 5-3 on penalties, setting up a quarter-final meeting with the Netherlands. Earlier, the Netherlands secured a dramatic 2-1 victory over Mexico, minutes after the Mexicans had seemed certain to reach the quarter-finals. Remember, all these top stories are available on our Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Katrine. Very good morning to you once again. Of course, after 30 days of psychiatric observation at the Westkopje Psychiatric Facility, the Pretoria High Court will today hear details. The report of the murder accused's mental health. The gripping murder trial, which started in March, has seen detailed evidence of the night the Paralympian shot and killed his model girlfriend, Riva Steenkamp. Well, we're now going to cross live to our reporter, Griselda Lewis, who is outside the court as always, as she has been for the last couple of months, really. Good morning to you, Griselda. Thanks for joining us.
Well, a very good morning to you, Eben.
Griselda, a quick update. What's the expectation today?
Well, Eben, just a few seconds before you came to me here in Pretoria, Oscar Pistorius has arrived here at the North Gauteng High Court after being evaluated for 30 days at the Westkopje Psychiatric Hospital as an outpatient. As you rightly pointed out, that we're expecting details today of that psychiatric evaluation report. What was Oscar Pistorius' true state of mind on the morning that he shot and killed Riva Steenkamp? We understand that Oscar Pistorius had completed his last session with doctors on the 20th of June and that family and friends had also been interviewed. So basically, Oscar Pistorius' behavior, you heard during the trial previously that Oscar Pistorius had said that he'd been having nightmares after the incident associated with Riva Steenkamp. So basically that's what we're expecting to take place inside court today, and also for the defense to call one of its latest witnesses. You heard previously, before the case had been postponed, that defense advocate Barry Roo had indicated that he had about 4 witnesses to take the stand before he wrapped his case. So we're expecting one of those witnesses to take the stand possibly today or even tomorrow.
Griselda, are we now in the final leg of this trial, and what is the expectation? Is it another week, 2 weeks? How many witnesses are still ahead of us?
Well, yeah, but it certainly looks like it is the last leg of this trial. Of course, if we're not in for another one of the surprises. I mean, the testimony of Dr. Merrill Foster, which saw Oscar Pistorius being referred to a mental institution, certainly that was not what we were expecting as journalists here outside court. So it certainly looks like it is the last leg of the trial, and we're expecting about 4 more witnesses. Advocate Barry Rue had indicated so before the case had been postponed. So I'm not sure exactly what time frame, of course, to put through that, because we still have to go through the cross-examination of those witnesses by the state prosecutor, Gerry Nel. So in terms of a time frame, we're not certain at this stage, Eben.
And just looking behind you there, Griselda, it looks as if interest has petered out a little bit in this case, hasn't it? Especially international media interest.
Well, yeah, but there is still quite a strong media contingent outside here. I mean, the Oscar Pistorius murder trial is certainly one of the trials that has been, watched throughout the world. But I would say for budgetary constraints in the majority, by international media, certainly the interest will pick up again once it is judgment. But as for now, some of the international media houses have decided to scale back because of budgetary constraints. Certainly there'd been a break for 30 days, of course, to allow for the evaluation of the athlete. But certainly, the more interesting the case becomes, and the details of that report should spark interest in this trial once again.
Finally, Griselda, if you had to put a time frame on it, when do you expect judgment?
Well, that is very, very difficult to speculate on at this stage, Eben. Certainly what we want to first see this morning is the direction which this trial will take this morning. Of course, we're expecting that report to be handed into court. That's the psychiatric evaluation report, and certainly from there we'll have an indication towards which way this case is going and whether the first witnesses will be called today or tomorrow, and when exactly the defence plans to wrap up its case. And certainly then we'll have an indication when judgment might be.
Thank you very much, Griselda Lewis, as always, keeping us up to date as to how this story is developing. It is a developing story. It's back in court today after 30 days of psychiatric observation. So if you want more detail, of course, we'll go there a little bit live, or live a little bit later, rather, in about 25 minutes' time. And Griselda will keep us updated throughout all of the shows, throughout the rest of the days. Now, to shed more clarity on exactly where we are in the legal process of the case, we're joined by legal expert Bernard Hotz from Worksmen's Attorneys, who has been joining us periodically for the last couple of months. Good morning once again, Bernard. Thank you for being with us.
Pleasure.
Let's just start at the beginning. It seems as if we've almost lost a little bit of track of this case, but Judge Mapisa made the ruling, 30 days of psychiatric observation. Just recap for us the purpose of an observation like this and in this specific case.
Eben, I do think the momentum is going to reignite again, but let's just recap where we were. Bearing in mind that Oscar has been charged with murder, we're dealing with mental intent, and the last defence witness, as we will recall, testified to Oscar suffering from general anxiety disorder. The moment that was raised, the judge had an obligation to say, I'm not an expert to adjudicate upon whether or not this is so, fact or fiction.
Yeah.
I therefore have to defer this matter to the experts to advise the court, is this in fact so? Did Oscar suffer from a diminished mental capacity at that particular moment in time?
Yeah.
And only once that is known can I, the judge, now continue and make an adjudication upon the merits when the case is finished.
How much weight do you think the findings of the past 30 days will carry in this case, and will it count in for or against him, in your opinion?
Well, I think we're going to see a little bit of interesting things happening, because bearing in mind we're dealing with an evaluation by experts, for experts, and I believe one of whom had a heart attack last week.
Yeah.
So I don't know the status of that report, but let's assume the reports are handed in today. If all of the experts are unanimous, that's one scenario. But bearing in mind, if they are unanimous, the defence or the state could object to the findings in the report. What that means is that the experts are going to have to come into court and subject themselves to examination and cross-examination.
Yeah.
The experts themselves may not be unanimous, and that of itself may necessitate them coming in and giving evidence. But let's look at the scenario. We've got one of three scenarios. They could say that Oscar is entirely fine.
Yeah.
At the moment in time, he didn't suffer from diminished mental capacity. The trial continues as it was on track. The second scenario could be that Oscar, in fact, does not appreciate, or did not at the time appreciate, did not have the mental capacity to appreciate his actions and the consequences of his action. That would be quite a curveball, because what that would mean is you'd have to go into a psychiatric institution indefinitely.
Yeah.
The third scenario could be, yes, he did, in fact, at the time, suffer from a diminished mental capacity. The trial continues now. When we get to arguing about sentencing, assuming he's found guilty, those would be factors brought up in mitigation of sentence.
We spoke about his defence changing a couple of times, 3 times, in the months that the trial's been going on. What effect will that have in the end, and do you see this changing again now?
We mustn't lose sight of the very important issue that arose during cross-examination. We recall that the defence was putative self-defence.
Yes.
And you'll recall the last time we debated, well, putative self-defence means I actually intended to do what I was doing because I thought I was in danger.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, Oscar's testimony was, no, I didn't intend to do what I did. So we mustn't forget all those contradictions that happened in evidence, and I think the experts now are going to shed an interesting light on his state of mind at that particular moment in time.
Let's shift the focus away from Oscar a little bit, and let's talk about counsel in this case. Barry Roux and Gerrie Nel, they've been at each other. They've had a little break now. What is your expectation from these gentlemen in the next couple of weeks?
Both of them are seasoned campaigners. It is Barry Roux's job to present the defence as best as possible. And as we've seen Gerrie Nel, his job as a skilled cross-examiner is to test each and every statement that is put forward to try and pick holes in it.
What is your expectation now for the next week? How do you see this case proceed?
I think, knowing how experts work, I would find it very surprising if all of them reached a unanimous conclusion. I think we may find the necessity for them to be testifying and being cross-examined in court, but I may be surprised. They may come to a resolution that none of us anticipate.
And what would that kind of resolution be?
Diminished mental capacity at that moment in time. Let the trial continue, and that there will be arguments in mitigation of sentence.
In this case, if that happens, are we looking at a lesser sentence and much less time in jail, one would think, if he was found guilty and the case played out like that?
I think so. I think one would be looking at a decreased sentence, but even it's so difficult to determine, because what we've seen thus far, this was a curveball that he had to go for the psychiatric evaluation. And let's see what the experts say. Let's not prejudge it. Let's see what they say about his mental state at that moment in time.
Finally, Bernard, a couple of weeks ago we spoke about it, this being almost a bit of a soap opera in the legal world. Do you think that this 30, or what effect do you expect this 30-day break to have had on this case?
I think everybody's now switched on the TV again. I think that they're watching it. I think it has raised a number of interesting legal debates. We've seen a whole host of legal issues being raised, and so from a lawyer's perspective, it is rather interesting. We must not forget the evidence that has already been adduced.
Yeah.
A lot of damning evidence. Mustn't forget about that. And let's see what the experts now say about the mental state.
Of course, that's what the judge will look at, the entire record, unlike us, members of the media and even members of the public who only on the day make a call. So we have to take the entire record into consideration.
The full conspectus has to be taken into account.
Thank you very much. Bernard Hotz from Workmen's Attorneys is always joining us and giving us his views on how this case will proceed and what we can expect. But let's take a quick look at what you say on social media, of course, at SABC Newsroom. That's where we live. On Twitter, Owen says, will the nation twist from World Cup and focus on Oscar Pistorius? Well, it's a big day for Africa at the World Cup. I doubt that somehow. Twape says, hate the headlines already. So Oscar Pistorius back today. That's right. Twape says. Lauren talks about Oscar Pistorius' team is picking at straws. JD, come on now. Why can't they just hold him accountable for it without a mental illness? Triple C's is talking about Oscar Pistorius. He's back from holiday. That's a little bit harsh. I wouldn't want a 30-day holiday like that, having to book into a mental institution every day, but that's probably what some of us in the media need to do as well. Jelly talks about the green bucket. He's due to appear in court later this morning. That's a little bit harsh, Jelly. Bobo talks, I don't think I'll be able to leave the house at this rate. You're going to have to leave the house at some point. It's Monday. Let's get our economy going. You can't be on strike as well, Bobo. What's happening on the front pages of the world? It's very busy in Nigeria, where the vanguard this morning, Chibok, burns again. That's the latest on the deadly attacks by suspected Boko Haram militants that have left numbers dead and injured. The state of emergency is in force in northern Nigeria following near-daily raids by suspected militants. Moving to the United Kingdom, and Britain took another step towards the EU exit door, as David Cameron warned that Jean-Claude Juncker's appointment to the top job in Brussels would make it harder to persuade the public to remain in the 28-nation bloc. Sports front pages in the US and Latin America celebrating Costa Rica's historic achievement, reaching the quarterfinals of the World Cup for the first time after beating Greece 5-3 on penalties last night. It was a wonderful achievement because they did so playing with 10 men for nearly 60 minutes. Marvellous achievement it was. You're watching Newsroom. We'll be back after a short commercial break.
The shortage of nurses places those nurses who are working under such pressure.
To have one registered nurse looking after a ward full of patients, of over 40 patients, is unreasonable.
But Africa has made tremendous progress. In the year 2012, there were only 50,000 children. 50,000 children too many, but only 50,000 children that died of measles in the whole of Africa, compared to 330,000 in the year 2000.
For all your health issues, join Dr. Sello every Saturday, 9 to 10 a.m. CAT.
Welcome back. You're with Newsroom here on SABC News. Now, the Economic Freedom Fighters leader, Julius Malema, is seeking legal action on a ruling that saw him kicked out of the National Assembly last week. The Red Overalls Army staged a walkout in solidarity with him thereafter. Malema accused the government for the massacre of 34 miners at Marikana in 2012. Meanwhile, Parliament is studying a recording of the debate on the State of the Nation address. Parliament could invoke legislation that deals with powers and privileges of MPs to deal with the conduct of the EFF and its MPs. Now, Durban-based political analyst Professor Patrick Bond says more outbursts from the EFF leader are likely in Parliament, especially as the Marikana Commission of Inquiry continues. Malema's remarks, is it freedom of expression rights as protected by the Constitution or unparliamentary behaviour? The Deputy Dean of the School of Law at the University of the Witwatersrand, Mr. Mtende Mango, joins us in the studio to give us clarity on the matter. Good morning, Professor. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
you said that there's nothing unparliamentary about Julius Malema. Just quantify that statement for us.
Well, I think let's start first from the Constitution. The Constitution grants members of Parliament absolute freedom of expression, right? And it gives them immunity from any civil or criminal liability for what they say in Parliament. Now, the only rider to that, or exception, is that the rules of Parliament and the Act that you referred to put certain limitations on that.
Yes.
But those limitations are not on the content of the speech. The sort of limitations that you find there really speak about the time limits you can speak.
Yeah.
So you can't speak loudly so that other people can't hear you. You can't speak when another person is speaking.
Yeah.
And also it says that you cannot use offensive language. Now that's very subjective, of course. But these are the kind of limitations that are there. Now, if you look at this against what Honorable Malema is accused of having said, none of those statements that he made contravene the rules of Parliament.
Even calling I can say, accusing the government of the massacre and of murder at Marikana, is that not unparliamentary?
Well, the rules of Parliament do not define what is unparliamentary. The rules simply say what the manner in which speech may be exercised in Parliament. One of the things that it says is that you cannot debate issues that are before Parliament. Now, you may recall that the chair, the presiding officer, one of the reasons for asking the Malema to leave the House was that the issue of Marikana was before the Commission.
Yeah.
Now, the Commission is not a court of law. So talking about the Marikana Commission or the issues that are being investigated by that commission is not something that is prohibited by the rules. So as far as I am concerned, with reading the rules, the statement that was made was not prohibited by the rules.
But surely the commission itself, the Marikana Commission, they've not come to a finding themselves. Surely Mr. Malema would then be preempting this commission's work and would therefore be out of order.
Well, if you say out of order, we have to look at if there are other rules prescribing what may be said or not. And as I've said, that there's no rule that prohibits the statement that was made. So in that sense, that statement was protected by the Constitution. So the question then becomes, did the chair have legal authority to ask Malema to leave the House?
Yeah.
And I say that she did not have legal authority, which means that her conduct was invalid and was an abuse of power.
How do you see this scenario then now play out in the weeks and months to come? One expects the EFF to continue with an antagonistic approach in Parliament to try and make their point. Do you see a lot more kicking out of the House scenarios playing out?
Well, I think that the Act you referred to, the Powers and Privileges Act, does give Parliament the power to investigate matters. And I would imagine that there's likely going to be some investigation of this. And I think just to be fair, to also say that if you recall from the recordings, when Malema was asked to leave, the other members of EFF in solidarity left with him. And during that process, they made a lot of noise as they were leaving.
Yeah.
Now, that could be, those members could be found in contempt of Parliament for their statements that they made, because now they were using loud words. They disturbed Parliament at that time, because remember that there was no more debate during the time they were leaving. If they had left quietly, it would have been fine. So they could be found in contempt of Parliament for speaking loudly, and also for willfully failing to obey Rule 46 of the Rules of Parliament, which essentially says that you cannot speak loudly in Parliament. That's one of the things that could happen. But I think there's something else that could be picked up about the behavior of the chair herself. Now, remember that the Supreme Court of Appeal has said that the chair or the speaker is supposed to behave in an impartial way, just like a judge. Now, if you recall, during the time when the EFF members were leaving, she descended into the arena of politics. She started responding to them also in a very loud way.
Yeah.
Now that also is contrary to the legal expectations of the Speaker of Parliament.
Just finally, quickly, you mentioned Section 46 of the Constitution. I'm going to take it further and talk about Section 47 as well, where we talk about undesirables in Parliament and so forth. Honourable Malema, with certain cases still hanging over his head and tax matters still to be resolved 100%. Do you see that also playing itself out in the weeks to come?
No, I don't think that will play out itself, because everyone is presumed innocent until proven guilty. And as far as I'm concerned, and as far as the law is concerned, those are mere allegations. And until they're proven in court and there's actually a decision in court, then we can begin to speculate as to what may happen. So far, I don't think that there's anything that will come out of that and play itself out in relation to this matter that we're speaking of.
In 30 seconds, quickly, last week, the scenario that played out with them walking out, staging the walkout and so forth. Do you think Honourable Malema and the EFF would have legal recourse to take this matter forward?
Well, the legal recourse, yes, could be sought in relation to asking Malema to withdraw from Parliament. But as far as I've mentioned to you, that the other members of the EFF, I think they could have to answer if the investigation is actually conducted as to their own conduct in Parliament. But yes, I think Honourable Malema does have legal recourse as to the decision to ask him to withdraw from Parliament.
Professor, thank you very much for joining us and giving us these unique insights around what has been a very charged matter in Parliament the last week or so. Thank you once again. That's, the Deputy Dean of the School of Law at the University of the Witwatersrand, Professor Mthende Mangu, joined us this morning. Now, we move on. Well, we shift focus, really. The Farlam Commission of Inquiry continues in Pretoria today, and police witness Mr. X is expected to continue testifying. Last week, factors influencing the level of force used by the police during the Marikana shootings came under the spotlight at the Commission of Inquiry on Friday. Police lawyer Ismail Semenya, SC, cross-examined international public order policing expert Gary White, who has criticised the police's Marikana intervention. Now, SABC reporter Nozintombi Mia has followed the story the last week or so and joins us live from Pretoria. Good morning, Nozintombi.
Good morning, Eben.
Just Mr. X is expected back on the stand today. Just what can we expect?
Well, Eben, we can certainly expect further explosive testimony and evidence from Mr. X. You will remember that with his previous testimony that was cut short on Tuesday last week, he had only gotten to about the 13th of August in 2012, and he described how the group of about 200 or so Makarapa miners had moved towards the nearby Inkaneng settlement, and they were on the rampage. They were looking for any miners that were not participating in the strike, and they would either beat them or they would kill them. But they were intercepted by police, whereupon you found that the police shot rubber bullets at the miners, and the miners retaliated, and they ended up killing 2 police officers and leaving 1 injured. So we're expecting further explosive testimony from Mr. X.
I want to backtrack a little bit, Ntombi, and talk about Gary White. Just tell us who Gary White is and why he took to the stand last week.
Well, Gary White is an international public policing order expert. Now, he comes from Northern Ireland, where in Northern Ireland there is quite a lot of public disruptions between the Catholics and the Protestants, and they're always fighting because of ideological differences. So the police in Northern Ireland have got a tough situation in having to maintain law and order in that area. And most of the time, when the 2 warring parties end up fighting, they end up including the police, and the police end up getting the brunt of it. So he was a very important witness for the SA Human Rights Commission, because he was able to share some of his experiences and how the South African police should have behaved, and how they should have planned, and how they should have rather implemented their plan. What he's basically said is that the South African police had poor planning, they had very little intelligence on the ground, and they should have rather withdrawn and regrouped, as opposed to engaging the miners and resulting in the casualties of 2 police officers dead and several injured by the striking miners. So he was a very important witness for the South African Human Rights Commission because he's been negative against the police. So it's been very interesting testimony from Gary White.
Police lawyers, they took strong, or they strongly criticised Mr. White in this case. Just tell us about the line of questioning and the line, sort of their defensive line that they were running with Gary White. What was that?
Well, one of the biggest arguments by advocate Ishmael Semenya, and he's a senior counsel for the police, he's dubbed the bulldog of this particular commission, and he has retaliated against Gary White, and he basically said that if a group of 200 armed miners are approaching police, the police themselves on the ground are quite scared, they're quite afraid, they don't have enough ammunition on them. What are you expecting them to do? These miners themselves have doused themselves with muti that they believe will make them invincible to police bullets. Therefore, tear gas doesn't work, rubber bullets don't work. How do you then expect the police to create order out of this particular chaos? He's basically said that it was the only option that was available to them to shoot live rounds to dispel the myth that the miners had, that the muti that they had on them would make them invincible. Once 1 or 2 of them had seen that their comrades were lying dead on the floor, they would then run away and would stop advancing on the police. It's a very controversial statement that he's made, but it's made his point that sometimes in certain situations you can't necessarily attack back with rubber bullets or with tear gas because it just enrages the miners and it creates an even worse off situation. But I don't really know whether or not Judge Ian Farlam will buy that line of argument.
Excessive force was very much on the agenda last week when Gary White. What do we expect? What sort of avenue do we expect testimony to take with Mr. X today?
Well, as I said in the first question, really, we're expecting that Mr. X will continue on giving his evidence around what happened after they then killed 2 of the police officers and took away their guns, took away their cell phones. We're expecting him to explain even further the details that had led up to the 16th, what other further muti rituals the miners embarked on, and how it was that a large group of the miners ended up signing with AMCU and deciding that they do not want the NUM to represent them any further. So we certainly are expecting further explosive testimony. From inside the gallery, we have seen some of the widows that have arrived, but as opposed to last week, what we're seeing now is a lot less of the presence of the miners. This could be attributed to the fact that the mining strike itself in the platinum and the gold sector has concluded, and most of the miners who were attending this particular proceedings have gone back to work. That could be one of the reasons that could be attributed to why there is a smaller crowd of miners who are here. But as with every other previous commission hearing that has happened, we're expecting that the widows will be here to hear what happened to their loved ones.
Nozintobi Mea giving us an update from Pretoria at the Farlam Commission of Inquiry into the Marikana shootings that happened on 16th of August 2012. I can tell you now that the court has started almost on time. It's 9:34 a.m. Let's go straight to the North Gauteng High Court for resumption of the Oscar Pistorius trial.
That's a good piece.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Roux.
Thank you, my lady. I agree. It's not to say that we will not accept the rest. It's just that we need to look at it and consider it and then come back to you as soon as possible.
You also got this when? This morning?
No, we received it over the weekend, my lady.
Oh, right. Okay.
But we need just to carefully go through it.
Yes. I understand it, but what about
and consult on it and just make sure that we're responsible in our approach.
Yes, no, I understand that.
But it's correct. But the findings itself, these Section 78 findings, my lady, that's not in dispute.
Okay, so nothing is in contention. Well, I'd like to thank both counsel with the assistance that you gave in respect of this matter. Thank you very much.
That's a good piece.
It's a good piece,
if I may, as Mr. Roos indicated, we're also still perusing it. The findings won't be an issue. Factual statements of the reports. Maybe, my lady, I'm not
Yes,
saying will,
yes.
but maybe. And that is the only thing that we will take into consideration.
All right, thank you very much. Because I also got this morning, and I haven't even looked at it. I didn't know where to look, so I decided not to touch it.
Yes, my lady.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Rue.
Thank you, my
ready?
lady. I called in the next witness. It's Dr. Versveld. May I, in the meantime, just to save time, make his report available. We formally prove it. It will be later on referred to as Exhibit RRR. 1 RRR2 and RRR3, but we have marked them accordingly.